people. She said, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
And welcome to another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. Really happy that we're able to engage like this on a regular basis. I really thank you for your comments that you made on and you continue to make on the previous podcasts. The feedback that you give us helps us to make the podcast better, make the content more relevant to you. So thank you very much for making that happen. And like I do every time, if you haven't done so, please pick up a copy of my first book, The Art of Ronin Leadership. See right behind me, have a kind of an image of my current book, The Art of Executing Ronin Leadership Strategies. That book was just released in print this week. It's been out on ebook for a while. That book is because of all of you, because I got a lot of feedback on the first book saying, we like the book, love the book, but can you tell us how? How do you build teams? How do you develop a strategy? It was more, so this book is more of a how-to book. So it's on Amazon, it's on myhowardauthor.com. So please take a look at that. But get that out of the way because I'm really excited about the guest that we have today. Maya Hu-Chan is a friend, a colleague, and it's interesting. We met years ago at an ISMA meeting. For those of you who don't know, ISMA is International Security Management Association. It's the organization that has the top chief security officers in the world. The people that we bring in to speak to us are world-class speakers. And I heard Maya for the first time. She's a keynote speaker. She's an executive coach for the C-suite on leadership. She's a best-selling author. We're going to get into all of that. But I was very, like my colleagues say, we were all obviously very impressed and wanted to make sure we kept in contact over the years. It's been wonderful to watch Maya's career progression, and I'm following in her footsteps when it comes to writing. We'll get into that a little bit during the podcast. But Maya, I just want to welcome you to our podcast. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to be part of this.
Thank you, Mike. Oh, what an honor to be on your podcast. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I guess, could you just tell my audience just a bit about yourself? Your background and what your kind of business journey. We want to go through that first a little bit.
Sure. So, let's start from the beginning. I was born and raised in Taiwan.
Okay.
And I finished my college and came to the U.S. to go to graduate school. And so I attended University of Pennsylvania. And when I first landed the U.S. when I was 21, and Philadelphia was my first stop. And
yeah.
so and I studied communications, but my background in undergrad was journalism and business.
Okay. Wow.
So I started, really become very, very interested in leadership. Was completely, actually, I have to tell you that it goes way back when I was first grade.
Really?
Yeah, when I was first grade, I was a very shy, very timid little girl, and didn't really want to say anything in school, and it was just always sitting by myself. And so when I entered the first grade, my teacher, I still remember her, so well. Her name is Mrs. Liu, and this is in Taiwan. So Mrs. Liu, we had big class. There were 72 students in that first grade class, and so I don't know why, but the first day of the class, Mrs. Liu pointed me. I was sitting in the back and say, you're going to be the class president.
What?
I was like, oh my gosh, what? And then I had no idea what that meant, right?
Right.
What am I supposed to do?
Yeah, class president.
It's a big title. So then she told me, and then she said, okay, so you are going to lead the class. And but most important thing that you're going to do is that every day we have six periods in a day. right?
Mhm.
So there will be different teachers come in for each period, and when the teacher comes in to the classroom, the president is going to speak loud and clear and say, "Stand up." So then all 72 kids will stand up, and
Okay.
then I say, "Bow." Everybody will bow and then say, "Good morning, teacher."
Wow.
And then I'll say, "Sit down." Okay. And that's my job. Every day I
Mhm.
have to do it 6 times a day. And I was absolutely terrified.
I'm
I
sure
didn't,
you were.
it was like, oh, how am I going to possibly speak so loud? So the first day I tried it and I was like, almost like little mouse. Like, nobody could hear me, right? I was just like,
Right?
stand up, ow. And then the
Right.
teacher didn't say anything bad. She didn't scold me or anything. She said a little bit louder so we can all hear you. So then I start to project, right? And then so my voice got louder and louder. By the end of the week, not only everybody can hear me, the next classroom could
Next
hear
class,
me.
you found your voice. You found your voice.
I found my voice, and that was it. I didn't have to say anything else. That was the main thing. And so
Huh.
I think that was kind of that inspired me to think that, wow, okay, if I actually um, use my voice and I
Mhm.
speak up, and it's not so bad, you know.
Yes.
And,
Yes. Yes.
and then that also start to inspire my confidence, and then I start to feel like, okay, well, I can probably do more. So I had to work with different kids in my classroom that they are in charge of different duties that
Mhm.
I coordinated, I organized it. So starting from the first grade, that job lasted me just 1 year, right? But I have to tell
Mhm.
you, I'm thankful for Mrs. Liu that she changed my life, because from that point on, I admire leaders and I became
Mhm.
very interested in leadership. And I also wanted to be a leader and I want to work with leaders.
Wow, that made quite an impression on first grade.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Yeah.
6 years old.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm with you there because I was kind of like I said in the first book. I was just like you. If I had a choice between an oral assignment or written, I would take written because I didn't want to get up in front of people. And even as an adult, at some point, I was always at one point, not anymore, but I was afraid of looking stupid. If you open your mouth, like you said, you didn't want to look stupid.
Right?
But you realize that you have a voice and you have something to say, and people actually will listen to you. So that's a great golden nugget, and you learned it early in life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then so I also learned that, you know, sometimes people may or may not realize that they can be leaders, right?
Hmm.
And then so most of leaders are not born. They were,
Yeah.
there are different circumstances that they can develop themselves or others can develop them, because leadership a lot of times is something that is a journey that we
Yes.
continue to learn and educate ourselves and practice leadership. And so, it can be something that we continue to cultivate. So,
Yes.
so I became very interested in leadership, but then I didn't know that that was going to become my profession.
Yeah. All right.
Well, my study was that I wanted to be a journalist when I
Mm-hmm.
was in undergrad study, and but I also had a business background. I thought, you know what, I'm really interested in both. So when I came to the U.S. to study graduate school, I studied communications, and
Mm-hmm.
then before I graduated, I actually had during the graduate study, I actually started. I worked for a newspaper as a
Mm-hmm.
just like kind of a side job, and because I enjoy writing and I also just love talking to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then I started working, talking to community leaders and politicians, and then I learned more and more about leadership. But it wasn't clear what I was going to do. But then
Mm-hmm.
after I moved to San Diego from Philadelphia after I graduated, it was completely by accident that I actually got to work with Marshall Goldsmith, who
Wow.
was my
That's huge.
so people, for your audience that who may not know who he is, that Dr. Marshall Goldsmith was rated #1 best CEO coaches in the world, and then
Mhm.
he has written multiple New York Times bestseller books, and he was my mentor. But then back then, when
Jeez.
I started working with him, I
Yeah.
learned back, this was 30 some years ago. It's everything about leadership, right? And so I started to back then there was no coaching. It was just
Hmm.
developing leaders. So we do programs. We have a leadership programs. We train leaders, and then we teach, and then we would teach them how to what are some of the skill set to become an effective leader, and but over time it started to evolve. So I find that this is definitely something that I was very passionate about. Um,
Hmm.
but then later on, I actually left the field and then became a CEO for a nonprofit in
Okay.
California. So then I had some leadership experiences, and I realized that wow, this is really leadership. You need some really on the ground experiences, and
Yeah.
but then eventually that I came back to leadership development because I find that this is my calling. This is what I want
Right.
is to be able to work with leaders. So then I started to do more coaching and
Mm.
teaching and speaking and also research and writing. So those are the things that I've been doing. And then I also find that I'm particularly interested in global leadership,
Hmm.
cross-cultural management, and also diversity inclusion. And so
Yeah.
that is kind of the area that I am particularly interested in. And I also find that because of my background and experiences, that I can actually contribute in a meaningful way in those areas.
Absolutely. I mean, that's, Marshall Goldsmith. I've mentioned him in my books a couple times, especially "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." That,
Right.
and so the fact that you were able to really train under him and learn from him is really huge. And what you said at the end also is very interesting because I don't find a lot of folks out there who are coaching and teaching that are really looking at either DNI or looking at global leadership. It tends to be very parochial, it's US centric or British or blah, blah, blah. So the fact that you're trying to cut across cultures, cut across geographies is really, really, really important work to do. Are you finding a ready audience for that as you're developing this line of your business?
Absolutely, absolutely. And our as you know, our world is getting smaller and smaller, right?
Yeah,
Everything we
yeah.
do, when we think about the work we do, it doesn't matter if you're a Fortune 500 company, corporation, or you're a small family-owned business, that we're in so many ways that we work with people, you know, across geography,
Hmm.
cultures, and just all kinds of diverse backgrounds. And we do so much work on the internet, and then we work with people who are from different backgrounds. So I think
Hmm.
this particular topic about global leadership and how do you work across differences is so important for leaders. Okay,
Yeah.
it's almost like it's really a competitive advantage for leaders to have that kind of global mindset.
Yes.
And so then they can work with, across all those differences, but then being able to bring people all together and
Yeah.
accomplish the purpose and the mission of the business.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I remember at Microsoft, so you would find leaders that had that global mindset. So let's say you have a global team because we're a multinational company, right? Let's say you have a team in Istanbul. There were some people that, if they wanted to have a meeting with it, it was always going to be Redmond time, right? It was always going to be Seattle time, US time, as opposed to, well, no, you need to get out of your comfort zone and get on their time zone, right? So you
Yes.
wake up at 11 o'clock at night and be cognizant and respectful of their needs, right? But it's amazing that how many people didn't even think about that, right?
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. So having a global mindset, it really means that it requires leaders to always think globally. Like your perfect example you just provided, right? Is that when we work with team members, when we work with customers who are in a different time zone, who is from a different country, that And it can be even people in the same country that are all based in the US, but we have different backgrounds that we should always kind of take it into consideration. What is their frame of reference? Where they're
Yeah.
coming from? And it's not just all about, US centric. That this
Hmm.
is where we're based, and so we schedule all the meetings at 9 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until
Exactly.
9 at
Right. Yeah.
5. Yeah.
Uh,
And it's for our convenience. I actually often heard, because in my coaching and work with leaders around the globe, that I often hear about leaders who are not based in the US or not based in the headquarters talking about, oh boy, I am I was up at until 1 o'clock, twice a week for this team project team call,
yeah.
or people are expecting me to work on the weekends because they don't realize that, well, this is my time off. And even nowadays, that when we're doing a lot of the video calls because of
Right.
working from home, that um, it would be ideal, of course, to have everybody turn on their videos. But then sometimes that people are, in a different country that they may not feel comfortable doing.
Yes.
I actually
Hmm.
once had a leader on the call with me, and then he said, "I'm really uncomfortable turning on my video because I am talking to you from my bathroom. I'm sitting
Oh,
I'm sitting on
right.
the toilet," right, basically. And he said, because we have a very small apartment, I have
Right.
little kids, and there's just no place for me to have this conversation, without interruption. I was like, okay, this is completely understandable. But I think that a lot of times that leaders, if we to have a global mindset, it's not just only that we need to have a very strategic perspective about global business, but also comes down to how do we interact with people one on one, right?
Yes.
What are they going through? And what I'm saying, is it offensive to them? Or am I making myself clear? Right? Am I
Yeah.
using American slangs and idioms when I communicate with them? Is there any misunderstanding? Do I come across as rude, or do I come across as empathetic and appreciative? So it really is something that leaders need to be more mindful about.
Yeah, I agree. That's awesome, and I think really good nuggets for the audience to hear this perspective. Something was interesting to me. So you were working for Marshall, with Marshall, I should say, and then you took off and you became CEO of a nonprofit, which I think is great because, like you said, you have to be a practitioner really to understand leadership. So, what were some of the nuggets that you learned in the years that you were doing that really, I don't know, was it a surprise to you, or how was your journey as CEO of becoming and actually leading an organization?
Yeah, I love that question. Mike, one thing that I've learned is that um, there's a big difference between managers and leaders.
Yes.
Okay. So a lot of times people are confused about those two terms. And so what's the difference? And so managers, the way I look at it is that managers manage things,
Hmm.
leaders lead people. Okay. So
Hmm.
managers tend to do things like they set objectives, they set the timelines, they deal with resources, they delegate responsibilities, they check on results, and they evaluate efficiency, those kind of things. They manage the timeline and projects. So managers manage stuff, manage things, manage resources. But then
Hmm.
leaders, what does leader do? Well, leaders need to do some of that, of course, but then leaders needs to also focus on inspiring confidence, okay, and build vision. And they have to interpret situations, helping people connect dots, and they have to be able to mobilize people,
Yes.
right? So as a leader, you have to not only excel in the hard skills, the technical
Hmm.
skills, the what, but also the soft skills as well. And then to be able to connect with people, to build trust, build relationships, and inspire people. And
Hmm.
so the soft skills is just as important, if not more important. than the hard skill. The higher
Yeah.
up you go, the more important it is to be able to build that kind of soft skill to be able to work with people.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest difference. And that's what I learned as a leader myself. And also over the years working with, senior leaders, executives, and,
Hmm.
around the world, that this is so important is not just focus on the technical, the hard skills, but then, how do I really work with people?
Yeah. Do you find that I love that answer. Do you find that to be so? The question in my head is: so you work with folks all around the world, leaders, and obviously there are differences. But are there some common traits that you found that you find in leaders that require, obviously you to coach them and get them to understand? Is it the more of the soft skill thing that you were talking about? Is that something that's common among a lot of leaders, that they're trying to do the right thing, but they don't quite have those soft skills yet? Is that fair
Yeah.
question? Yeah.
Well, typically, when I work with leaders, um, we would do a 360, leadership assessment.
Oh
And
yes,
so, so
I remember.
you remember those, right? So what 360 feedback process means that, so we would either survey or interview the leader's boss, peers, and also their direct reports. Sometimes also include their customers, right?
Hmm.
And to get feedback, those are all confidential feedback about
Hmm.
their experience and perception about working with this leader. And then we collect all this feedback, and then we look at what is the strength, what are some of the core strengths of this leader, and what are
Right.
some of the key areas the leaders needs to develop, or perhaps it's the blind spot. So, you know um, over the years, I've worked with literally thousands of leaders in all different
Hmm.
industries around the world. That um, one thing that I've learned is that, they I don't need to teach them any hard skills,
Okay.
because they get to where
Yeah.
they are because they're technically very competent,
Right.
right? They don't need to, learn any more of that from me. But what they tend to need to focus on is, how do you lead, and how do you interact with people? How do you build that trust and relationship? And then how do you create that vision? And
Hmm.
how do you develop your people? How do you grow your talents? And then how do you bring
Yeah.
a team together to accomplish this common purpose? Right. And so those are so definitely those are some of the key challenges. And I also have found that um, many leaders that I work with are really struggling with building their executive presence,
Hmm. Hmm.
okay, their leadership presence. And
Hmm.
um, you know sometimes that they may have very very strong technical skills, and but then they don't feel like the people are people are listening to them or taking them seriously.
Hmm.
And then sometimes that because of their particular communication style or leadership style, that does not always foster positive relationships with others.
Right.
So those are some of the key areas that we tend to work on. Is
Yeah.
It's really help leaders develop those soft skills, because the
Hmm.
soft skills are very hard to master.
They are. It takes a bit of introspection and emotional intelligence, I think, right, to
Mhm.
really get to the point where you know yourself well enough, flaws and all, that you're comfortable in your own skin, so you can actually be natural and be a real leader, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then that's also one of the reasons that I wrote my most recent book, Saving
Hmm.
Face. It was like because my years of experience working with leaders, I realized that one of the key challenges that people have, um, when it comes to leading, is that they often tell me, I have you know um, team members that are really have some conflict that I have to deal with,
Right.
or a lot of times that there was the people are not motivated, or perhaps they are there was a lot of performance issues.
Hmm.
So when it comes to those kind of issues, and I when I drill down to it, right? And I find that has a lot to do with how people interact and relate to each other,
Okay.
and then how the leader actually lead in those kind of situations. So when it comes down to it, a lot of times that it's when you hear the term, it's not about the money. A lot of times it's often about how they feel they're being treated, or
Okay.
how they feel like if they belong. So I call that about face,
Yes.
right?
Wow. Uh, yeah, you're spot on. When people leave because of leaders or bad management, bad leadership, right? When they talk to HR all the time, HR will tell you, well, 9 times out of 10, they're leaving not because they didn't like the job, they don't like how they're being led or not being led, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, I love this quote from Maya Angelou that
Okay.
I think we all heard of this quote. She said, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you make them feel.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yes. Yeah, that's so true. That's a great leadership kind of thing for people to carry within themselves as leaders to remember that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then how do you really build that trust and
Yeah.
also preserve the that dignity, right?
Hmm.
Make people feel that they're valued, appreciated, and respected. And
Yeah.
so they wanted to follow you. And being a leader is not about telling people what to do.
Yeah.
It's not about giving orders. And it's not about you have this big fancy title. It's about inspire people so they wanted to follow you and wanted to achieve that common goal with you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. That is so true. Um, so you're in this journey, your journey,
Yeah.
and I mean, you've written 2 books, correct? Or is this your third?
Yeah, no, actually, I co-author 14 books total.
Okay.
But Saving Face is the book that I am the only author, and that's the
Okay.
newest one. Yes.
Wow. So um, what inspired you to write that book?
Well, that's a good question. I think what I've been thinking about writing this book for years.
Okay.
Yeah, and as I have been coaching and working with leaders around the
Hmm.
world for 25 years, and I learned so much about their success stories and also their struggles, their challenges, such as burned out conflicts and high attrition rate and burned out,
Hmm.
those kind of issues. The most consistent characteristics that in nearly all of those challenges is that how people deal with each other. And I have actually shared this concept of face,
Okay.
and it resonates with leaders at all levels across different cultures. And
Hmm.
this is so essential for their leadership, but it's also sometimes counterintuitive sometimes, right? And
Hmm.
so the face is actually a universal concept that beyond its origin in Asia. Okay, and the concept of face permeates all the social business interactions.
Hmm.
Okay, so it speaks to the common human desire to be accepted and respected. So as I was contemplating and thinking about this concept about face, has three key concepts: saving face
Hmm.
and honoring face, and also avoid causing people to lose face. Those are the
Oh,
three
okay.
key things, right? And then I think, well, how can I um, put this in together so that to really help leaders build that kind of relationship that is solid, long term, and then can really help them foster this positive relationship, across all the human differences. And
Hmm.
so I started to put together some of the key concepts, and then start thinking about, in this day and age, that leaders in large companies and small organizations, we all have to deal with, number one, we work with diverse teams.
Hmm.
right? We work with people across, with different backgrounds. And then we also have to work with people virtually,
Yes.
in a remote team. And we use technologies, but we rarely see people face to face in person. So that's a big
Hmm.
challenge for leaders. And then also social media, it's another challenge that it's so easy to offend or insult somebody without this normal check and balance of having
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
the actual confront them face to face with your slide.
Yeah.
So as I think about all the situation that we're facing right now, and I think this ancient concept, this
Hmm.
3,000-year-old concept about face, and it's really relevant in today's world. And then how do we go back to the basics?
Hmm.
Really start thinking about in our everyday interaction with people, what can I do to honor face for this person? Meaning that how can I acknowledge them, listen to them, and treat them with respect? And how can I avoid causing them to lose face? Meaning that to don't make them feel humiliated or insulted, but then really to honor them for who they
Yeah.
are. And but at the same time, how do I save face when there is a potentially very damaging or sensitive situation, but then still create positive results?
Hmm.
So, and people often ask me, well, are you saying saving face means you're just not going to deal with the situation?
Hmm.
No, actually, it's the exact opposite. When we think about saving face is not about being soft.
Hmm.
It's not about avoiding the conflict or dance around the issue. And it's not about tolerating poor performance or try to cover up your own mistakes or avoid accountability, or being phony or just have lip service. It's the opposite of that. So in order to save face successfully, you need to have both accountability and benevolence.
Yes. Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so benevolence meaning kindness and being able to demonstrate respect. So you have to do both. You must be able to demonstrate respect at the same time being able to hold people accountable.
Yeah. It's a balance, but it's yeah, I think it's brilliant because it was going through my head as you were talking about it, the saving face, honoring face, and trying to not help people lose face. But the concepts you've talked about are really needed, especially in today's world. We're so fragmented and disjointed, and that not just with governments and politics, but it goes into business as well. And it's hard enough for people. I mean, I'm kind of glad I'm retired, so I'm not in the enterprise world anymore. But I can imagine, the pressures of, the post-pandemic and all these other pressures. So this concept you're talking about is really needed, and it's not you could still be, like you said, hold people accountable, but be very cognizant of the feelings. It goes back to the Maya Angelou quote, I think, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then the interesting thing here is, Mike, sometimes we can cause people to lose face. We don't even know it.
Hmm.
Right? And a lot of time it's completely unintentional. Right?
Yeah.
So let me share a true story with you. A client of mine, I've been coaching him for a while, and
Okay.
he um he was on the phone with me one time, and he was visibly upset. Right?
Hmm.
And then so this is a Singaporean executive
Okay.
that he's based in Singapore but works with the American company. This is a
Hmm.
global company. And so he's been working for a global company for, a couple, like for almost 15, 20 years, right? So he speaks, of course, perfect English and very, very polished and successful. But then his manager is American. And I also know,
Okay.
right?
Hmm.
So then during that coaching session, I could tell something was wrong. Something was
Hmm.
off. I said, what happened? Are you okay? He said, well, I'm really upset because I had a really bad call with my manager, John. Okay. And I said, it's not a real name, by the way. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I say, tell me what happened. And he said, well, he said I was stupid. and I am so humiliated. I'm really upset, and
Wow.
I'm really really insulted by that. And I said, well, tell me more. Tell me more about what happened, right? And he said, yeah, we were talking about this new marketing initiative, and I was sharing some of my ideas with him, and then John said something like, "Oh, it's a no-brainer," right? And so and as soon as I heard that, I knew that there was
Yeah.
a misunderstanding, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I said, okay, okay. So let me tell you what no-brainer means in
Right.
American conversation, right? In a US context. And then I said it didn't, and then he said, well, no-brainer means I have no brain, means he thought I was stupid. I said, no, 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 it's actually that's not what he
Wow.
meant, right? And I explained to him what it actually meant. It's
Right.
actually not a negative concept at all. And
Yeah.
then so I was like, oh, okay, well, hey, that's kind of obvious. Well, let's go with that. So as soon as he heard what that meant, he was so relieved. Okay.
Hmm.
And but then do you think that he was going to, if we didn't have that conversation, okay? And do you think he would go back to John and say, why did you say I'm stupid? Do you think he
Yeah.
would confront him? Never,
No.
never.
Never.
Yeah. And then what's likely to happen? You know,
Yeah. It just feel demoralized and just have these conceptions that aren't real, but to him they're real. Right.
exactly. And then he's gonna feel terrible. And then this probably gonna damage his relationship with John. And then
Yeah.
John didn't even know
Yeah.
what happened. Right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So like this kind of situation
Oh.
happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to communication. That and it could be has nothing to sometimes it has nothing to do with language.
Hmm.
And it could be just the tone of your voice when you're on the phone or in your email communication or your text message. If you're in a hurry, maybe it can come across as short with people, or sometimes we may cut people off. Those kind of things, and those are simple things that can really um cause people to lose face, and then they can um erode trust
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
others.
That's an interesting story. That because as soon as you said, yeah, with it's a no brainer. Like what?
What's wrong
Wow.
with that? Right?
I know, right? What's wrong with that? Yeah, that's a great story. So you're working now in different companies, and so you've got, let's say, the baby boomer generation, right? And
Hmm.
they're probably starting to retire, move on, but a lot of them are still at work. Um, do you find any differences in terms of the people being receptive to your message, whether it's age group demographics or experience wise? I mean, are you finding is there a difference?
That is a really interesting question. Mike, as we um,
Hmm.
we work with leaders more and more now these days, I notice that my clients are younger and younger,
Yeah,
right? And
right.
so I used to work with leaders who were in their 40s and 50s, and now many senior leaders are actually in their 30s, and a
Yeah.
lot of the high potentials are actually in their mid to late 20s. And so when I started working with them and learning about their responsibilities as leaders, and also their struggles and their challenges, as well as what they believe, their core
Hmm.
values. And then I think a lot of this concept of faith really resonate with them, right?
Hmm.
Because they realize that a lot of the younger leaders are uh, really value those personal connections,
Hmm.
right? And they want to be empowered, and they want to be heard, and they wanted to actually feel that they belong and they're part of the organization, they're part of the team. And a lot of times that they also wanted to feel that uh, there is a lot of negative perceptions about the Gen Zs or the millennials of
Hmm.
being, there is a lot of negative sort of definition about them. But then when you look closer and when you talk with them, you realize that No, there actually are those a lot of that are not accurate. Many of them are really hard workers, and but then they show up differently. They say, you know what, they have a vision about I would like to be someday have my own business, for example, or I want to be the expert in this particular area. And then
Hmm.
I work for this company now, but I don't see that I'm going to work here for 30 years. I see myself working here for 5 years, and then I'm going to move on to something else. And then I may start my own, practice or business down the road. But when I'm here, I will work as hard as I can. I like to collaborate and I like to, advance my career. And, but I also want work-life balance. I don't
Hmm.
want to work 80 hours a week. I'm gonna make sure I take time for my family and for my hobbies and for my health and so they have different priorities than their parents' generation.
Yes.
And so I think that as leaders that we need to pay attention to that and say, what are some of the things that we need to do to honor that
Hmm.
so that we can have the best environment for our workers, for our employees at the same time, so then they can do their best work because they feel valued and appreciated, and really respect that diversity, right? Because
Yeah.
not to expect that why can you work as hard as me when I was your age? I was blah blah blah.
I know, right? Yeah.
They're different. That it's not better or worse, but it's I
It's just
think
different.
it's different. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just
So
funny you mentioned that because I don't think you ever met her. Her name was Samantha. She was my business manager at Microsoft. I talk about her a lot. She's a millennial. And I remember we were at a security conference, not ISMA, another organization, as is, and there was a session on sort of leadership styles, different demographics, right? But it was interesting. There were two baby boomers, like my age, giving the presentation, and they
yeah,
brought up a slide about the millennials. So millennials are this, and this, right? And so I was sitting next to Sam. I said, when they had questions, I kind of raised my hand. I said, you guys are talking about millennials. You have one right here. A lot of you know her. Why don't you ask her if those things are accurate, right? Because it was exactly like you were saying. It
yeah,
was the connotation was that it was negative because they act a different way. But
yeah.
as you so brilliantly put it, it's not good or bad. It is what it is, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then they just have different priorities. And so I think as leaders, one of the things I've learned from doing right when I was writing the global leadership book,
Okay. Yes.
and and also years of working with leaders, that one of the key characteristics for an effective leader is adaptability,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So it's not one size fits all. When you work with different people in different situations, and whether they're millennials or Gen Zs or baby boomers or Gen X, think about what is what is the best scenario that you can work with them so that they can feel psychologically safe at
Yes.
work, and not being judged for who they are. If they wanted to have a blue hair, okay,
Yeah.
have blue hair. If
Yeah.
but if their role, if they get they do their job well, and
Hmm.
and then they can accomplish what they're there to do, and or they rather work 4 days straight and 10
Hmm.
hours
Hmm.
a day versus
Yeah.
9 to 5 every day. Or some of them say, hey, you know what, there, just give them some flexibility, and then at the same time holding them accountable, and knowing that some of the key motivators may be very different from person to person,
Hmm. Yeah.
so being able to adapt your leadership style, and to truly grow and support your talent, then
Yeah.
you're leading.
Yeah, I love that word adaptability. I'm glad you mentioned that because that is important. And I also love the fact that a couple times in our conversations you've mentioned the accountability piece. So while you can be introspective and have good emotional intelligence, you still have a business to run. You still have P&Ls to meet and that kind of stuff. And so holding people accountable is great. I have one final question that I actually haven't asked anybody, but it just struck me as we were talking, right? So you talked about your experiences in first grade, finding your voice with Mrs. Lou, right? And then you worked as a CEO. Now you're coaching. There's a I find a lot of people that I've mentored over the years. The one thing that's an obstacle, and I actually wrote about it in my last book, but speaking in public, right? So first grade, you found your voice, but obviously at some point in your life, you're making speeches, or you're doing presentations in front of the C-suite, board of directors, et cetera, et cetera. Um, tell us about that journey. So while you had your voice, did you ever have any doubts? Were you ever scared before you got in front of people? Or I mean, because I think people want to listen to that because they
Yeah.
think that everybody who's a public speaker, oh, you just know how to speak in public. No, it doesn't work that way.
No, no, it doesn't. Right, right.
No.
Well, Mike, I'm glad you asked this question because that was one of the top three topics that I coach executives on,
Hmm.
is public speaking. And how do you develop that confidence and to be able to show up and as a leader, but then to be able to convey your message in a
Hmm.
way that that's compelling and be able to influence others and inspire others. So, my journey has been, I don't think I was a born speaker at all.
Hmm.
In fact, like I said, when I was first grade, I was very shy. I never
Right.
hardly say a word, right? But then naturally, I'm not a very outspoken person. And then
Hmm.
so I think that what happened was that over the years that there are many opportunities come my way to require me to stand in front of the group to speak. And I think the most important thing that I have learned is that number one, you gotta practice.
Yes.
It doesn't come
Good.
automatically. Even the best speaker I know, I've met and worked with a lot of professional speakers, and
Hmm.
some of them they made it look so easy, but you don't know that they've been practicing 20, 30, 50 hours before they
Hmm.
get on stage and do their presentation,
Right.
right? All this hard work will pay off if you actually you're putting some time to really, really practice. So
Hmm.
I think practice is really key. And there are many ways that I think we can develop that skill set. But another thing I think for me is it really helps um, is to be able to visualize the outcome.
Hmm.
Okay. And so I learned that through one of the coaches that I work with, that she actually helped me with my public speaking skills. This was years ago, and she told me, she said, close your eyes and then envision that. Just remember. Do you remember one of the talk that you gave that went well? Doesn't matter how
Hmm.
small it was. It could be just 3 people. It could be
Right.
with 500 people, but
Right.
just gonna go back to that setting and then think about at the end, how did it describe to me, how did that feel? It was like I felt that people were you know um they were excited, and they were giving me a standard ovation, and whatever that was, right? Think about how that
Hmm.
makes you feel, and then envision that this next presentation you're going to make, at the end of that presentation, that's what's going to happen. And I find that exercise extremely helpful because you know that you've been there, you've done that.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And then you put yourself in that end state. Like a Stephen Covey said, that always keep what was the saying, that keep the first thing, the end state in mind, right? And then
Hmm.
then I like to envision that, and then it just provide that kind of um, mental confidence, psychological confidence, that when I woke up there, I already see the end, and I knew that it's going to be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I love that practice. All right, practice, practice, practice. But I love the visualization. Special forces, Navy SEALs, they do a lot of visualizing. Which is why
Yeah,
they can perform well in adverse circumstances because they've already visualized them succeeding, or like you said, going back to a time when an operation went smoothly and everybody came out alive and whatever it was, right? And so I think for people listening, you should really take that to heart, the practice piece, but the visualization piece gives you a sense of calm and also gives
yes.
you confidence, right? That you can do this.
Yes, yes, Mike, I love that example that you provided. Absolutely. Navy SEALs, a special force, it's you have that it really kind of calm you down because in your heart, in your gut, you know that it's gonna work out.
Yeah, yeah.
Stay the
And
course.
say the course. And the other thing that, for me, it was an epiphany for me when I first started speaking was, I go back to my school days, right? I'm afraid that people are going to either make fun of you or they're not going to like something you say, but you have an audience that essentially are there to listen and learn, right?
Yeah,
They want to learn from you. They're not there to throw stones at you, or they want to take a nugget so they can go back and become better leaders. And
right.
so to me, that also keeping that, and that they're not a hostile audience. Now, if you don't do a good speech and you didn't do the prep work, they could be eventually, but 9 times out of 10, they just want you to give them something, and in turn, hopefully, you get that dialogue, and they give you something back, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then, even if you make a mistake, right?
Yeah,
And there are two ways you can deal with it. Number one is that just make fun of yourself and just make a joke out of it. It's use
yes.
humor to say, oops, here it goes again. Look what I
Mhm.
did, right?
Wrong. That's the wrong slide, but we'll get back to it, or
That's
something.
right. Exactly. Or something completely went off, the script. I mean, you just make fun of it. And, or sometimes people don't even know that you made a mistake.
Sure.
You forgot to tell a story, if you whatever that is, you forgot to make you have 5 points, you only mentioned four, nobody knows, right?
Right.
So you just carry on, just
Right.
keep going, take a deep breath.
Yeah, and I like that. You said that many times in this talk too. Carry on, just keep going. Which I think is
Yeah.
awesome. I could go on and on talking to you. I felt like I'm sitting in one of your speeches, like back at ISMA. Because I've learned a lot, and I think the audience has learned a lot about what you have to say. There's a lot of nuggets here that I'm going to actually capture myself. I want to get a copy of your book. Um, so if you could tell our audience, again, the name of the book, how they can get the book, and then how can people contact you if they want to be able to use your services, your team services, to become better leaders?
Absolutely. So the book is available on Amazon.com, and it's either in print version or audio version or ebook. Three
Okay.
different versions, and all on Amazon. And you also can contact me through my website. So my
Mm,
website is www.mayahuchan.com, and it's my name, MAYAHUCHAN.com.
mhm. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. So this has been a lot of fun. This has been a lot. This has
Me
been a
too.
book.
We can
This
talk
is
forever, Mike.
we could do this like for 2 hours, and we may probably have to bring you back on at some point to get some
Anytime.
other. Oh, good. I'm glad. But really, thank you for taking the time out of I know your very busy schedule to do this. I think the folks that are listening to this, they're going to glean a lot of nuggets from this, and we're certainly here to help and support what you're doing, because I think what you're doing is really important. The points that you talked about, especially the saving face and honoring face, and making sure that people don't lose face. I think those kinds of concepts are really important, especially like we said, in today's world. So thank you for what you're doing to raise and grow better leaders and to teach them to stay the course.
Thank you, Mike. All the best. Thank
All
you
right,
so
you
much for
too.
having me.
All right, take care. Hold on.